Oh, why him? Take me instead.
You know, as somebody who's familiar with Edgar Allan Poe, I'm glad to say that from a narrative standpoint, this episode's title makes a lot of sense. Now, the Telltale Schedulebot still isn't a very good name because it's just another case of replacing a word with the name of one of the characters regardless of how poorly it rolls off the tongue, but unlike, say, Bubbles of the Opera, this title is relevant to the actual story it's trying to tell. Sure, Heart and Schedulebot sound nothing alike, nor do they share the same number of syllables, and that certainly shouldn't be dismissed. I mean, Electric Buttercup was the same way, but at least I can see why it was chosen. The poem, written by Poe, tells the story of a narrator who recounts to the reader that he murdered someone and hid his body under the floorboards, kind of like how Buttercup buried Schedulebot in the backyard back in Road Trippin' from Season 1, which I reviewed like 2 years ago. Wow, that long already? Oh yeah, and that's what's most worth noting about this one. This is an extremely rare episode with continuity that calls back to a previous episode of the show. But with that briefing out of the way, let's just get right into the episode.
Ghost story time. I call this one The Revenge of the Curse of the Haunting of the Rock Monster.
So with that overly complicated introduction out of the way, Schedulebot happens to rise from the grave at the time Buttercup is telling her story, leading to some convenient parallelism that allows us to recall that Schedulebot was killed however long ago. And yet, I have to ask, what is causing him to rise from the dead now? What instigated him reactivating so that he could go to the door now? I think this would have worked better if there was a catalyst to actually set this off instead of it just randomly happening, or an actual reason given to us for his revival. I know this is a cliche answer, but I'd have a bolt of lightning strike the ground where he's buried as a way of re-energizing his system, or I'd just scrap the scary story intro entirely and have the professor dig him up while using a metal detector in the backyard or something. Just anything that would actually instigate Schedulebot to be coming out of the ground like this. The flashback isn't entirely consistent with Road Trippin' though. In that episode, Schedulebot had some weird costume on that he was buried in, which is clearly missing here. But hey, the show never sweats the small details, does it? In comes the professor to see Schedulebot's dead corpse laying on the ground, and thus he screams in an epic no as a response because, wouldn't you know it, the most annoying character in the show wants another annoying character in the show to come back to life. Also, Buttercup's shadow doesn't have any arms in this shot, and the professor lacks shoulders entirely. Like, his shadow is literally just a rectangle. Cut to presumably the next morning, where the professor wants to find out who killed Schedulebot, and I mean, logically speaking, he could just think back to the last time he saw the guy, which would have been when he was babysitting Buttercup and Blossom while he was on his road trip with Bubbles, but I'm gonna guess that the professor either forgot because he's an idiot, or he's an idiot because he forgot. Like, even if we assume that he forgot, somehow, he doesn't even begin to question Blossom, Bubbles, or Buttercup at all this entire episode. Not once does he straight up ask the girls, hey, what happened to Schedulebot? It's not like the girls were asked and then they lied to him or anything. No, the professor just straight up doesn't confront his daughters about whether or not they know anything. Who else, besides the girls, knows who Schedulebot even is? Besides you four, there's no one else in the show that is established to know who this robot even is. You would think to question the only 3 people who know about him before doing anything else. But no, whatever. Instead, Bubbles decides to take up the helm, questioning the professor and his relations to the deceased. Meanwhile, Blossom and Buttercup keep their lips completely sealed, and I'm genuinely surprised Blossom doesn't just out Buttercup for killing Schedulebot. I mean, I don't know if you recall from Road Trippin', I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but Blossom never had anything to do with Schedulebot's death. I mean, I guess she had a hand in trying to repair him, but both times Schedulebot was attacked, it was Buttercup's doing. If you ask me, she really has nothing to lose, and she'd probably better herself by outing Buttercup and telling the professor the truth right away. Next thing we know, Bubbles is in her room interrogating a stuffed dog toy when Blossom and Buttercup fly in the room and question what's going on.
Where were you on the night Schedulebot was attacked? And don't give me that puppy dog look!
This leads Bubbles to reveal that she found the shovel that was used in the crime, which Buttercup actually gives a pretty good reason as to why she didn't get rid of it.
Why would I throw away a perfectly good shovel?
Yeah, I mean,
That's fair!
next we get a montage of Bubbles and Octi going around in this parody of a buddy cop detective show called Street Justice for whatever reason. Personally, it just feels to me like it's a complete waste of time. Not to mention the fact that Street Justice is an actual crime drama that ran on television from 1991 to 1993, although I wouldn't really expect anyone to know that nowadays, considering it's been long since forgotten, so who knows if this was intentional or not. I mean, heck, I didn't even know about it till I decided to search up the name. The montage really just has nothing to do with what's going on, because literally right after this supposed gag, Bubbles disappears from the rest of the episode with the exception of 2 brief insignificant moments, which I'll point out when they show up. Alright, well, technically the next scene transitions to the backyard where Bubbles is inspecting Schedulebot's grave, but Blossom just hands her some scratch and sniff stickers and she flies off to do something else. Okay, now we only see her 2 more brief times. The professor calls the girls inside and proceeds to allude that he knows that they were the culprit for Schedulebot's disappearance without actually saying it outright in a moment of suspense that honestly makes you think he's actually being serious for a second.
What sort of vile, horrible, awful, despicable, revolting, nefarious, sickening monster could do this?
Then you find out that he's just gonna repair the robot's memory and he'll tell him himself, which, I mean, it makes sense and all, but the reboot pulls this very same Professor acts serious and suspenseful until the immersion is ruined by some flat punchline so many times that it's just so predictable now. Later that night, Buttercup sneaks back into the lab, Mission Impossible style, while Blossom questions her and the 2 attempt to shut down Schedulebot, only to accidentally initiate his secret destruction mode that the professor installed for some reason. I don't know, the professor's an idiot. And the girls end up getting chased by heat-seeking missiles. The original plan Blossom came up with involved tricking Bubbles into hacking into his memory banks, but Buttercup didn't have time for that and just started mashing buttons like she did in Rainy Day because clearly that worked the first time. Also, why the hell would the professor program his robot to detect and kill his daughters? Like, you would think he would program the robot to be able to detect the Powerpuff Girls as friendly allies or something, but no. During all of this, Bubbles is seen sleeping calmly in her room. You know, at first I thought this moment was really adorable. At first. Out comes the professor, questioning why Schedulebot is in destruction mode, and the girls confess that they murdered him with a shovel because of how annoying he was. You know, which is true. The professor doesn't really care what their reasoning was, though. No matter what the girls say, he just goes on this mighty speech about how the robot was there for them in the past and blah blah blah, ignoring the girls' warnings that there are missiles headed straight for him. Truth be told, at this point, if he's gonna be oblivious to these missiles headed straight for him, then just let him hit him. Teach him a lesson or something. This is a cartoon. It's not like he's gonna die or anything. Let him have what's coming to him. Also, there's the fact that Schedulebot literally does nothing else during this moment. Like, he just sort of sits there doing nothing, and it makes this scene seem very static and lessens the impact of his destruction mode because he doesn't do anything with it. It kind of makes him look pathetic, honestly.
Whenever you couldn't remember why you were wearing lederhosen, he hit the deck!
And speaking of pathetic, it's also pathetic that the missiles end up hitting Schedulebot and blowing him up after the girls knock the professor out of the way, and then the professor gets crushed seeing his creation get destroyed once again. You know, despite the fact that it's his fucking fault Schedulebot got hit in the first place. If he would have just moved out of the way like the girls were telling him, this never would have happened. But of course he's an idiot, so he wouldn't notice that. The next day, Blossom and Buttercup are outside fixing their house when the professor walks up to them, remiss about the passing of the robot once again.
I can't bear the thought of never hearing his sweet, gentle reminders ever again.
Punishment time! Punishment time! Punishment time!
So I rebuilt him.
So, why didn't he just do that in the first place? Like, why is Schedulebot being damaged in the first place such a big deal if the professor can just rebuild him again? See, this is the exact same complaint I made with Silico's backstory, and ironically, this time it was actually followed through with. Why waste time moping over the robot being broken when you can literally just repair them again? It's not like it's gone forever the same way organic, living beings are. It'd be one thing if he could never get Schedulebot back and he was truly gone forever, but he's not. He's right here, same as he always was, so his death means nothing. It meant nothing at the beginning, it meant nothing at the climax, and now it means nothing at the conclusion. Is it just me? Or does it seem like this robot is more of a son to him than the girls are his daughters? And last but not least, Bubbles gives us a non-sequitur ending that has nothing to do with anything.
Just goes to show you, crime doesn't pay, except when it does. All right, Octi, let's ride.
When did it pay? Buttercup and Blossom got punished. They didn't get away with anything. I don't know, maybe if Bubbles had committed some crime too and she was shown getting away with it, it would make a bit more sense, but as it stands, this final line was a very poor choice of dialogue if you ask me, and if it was an attempt at a joke, well, I'm sorry, but the crime-paying aspect of it doesn't correlate to anything. But I guess with that, another episode come and gone. I honestly thought this one was pretty weak considering it was another Professor episode and Schedulebot was involved. Bubbles' side stuff wasn't very entertaining to me personally and felt like a distraction meant to fill time. Plus the entire plot was one you could probably see coming from a mile away. I do appreciate the little tie-in to road tripping with continuity and a progressing story across seasons, but aside from that, I've got nothing more to add. What a dud.